So let's talk about the GOATs. I mean, honestly, I had already done videos, the Michael Jordan one that I did, and I had done LeBron ones, but I said in the Michael Jordan video that I was going to come back and do another one of those, but I never did just because the trade broke out of Damian Lillard and then Drew Holiday. Subsequently, I couldn't do the videos since those were bigger stories. Then media days started happening, and as I see it, I'm probably not going to get to make a lot of these, right? So let's start with one. Today, my GOAT, I just wanted to talk about Shaq. I know that he's not the most popular GOAT, but I definitely think that the Diesel is one of the greatest players of all time. And really, the point of this series is just to give love to everybody. It's not, to say this person's over this person or this person. Like, let's face it, they're all amazing. And especially when you look at the top 12 players of all time, there's an esteem to those tiers and to that level of competitiveness, which is really insane. But let's be honest, Shaq was a beast. Shaq was the beast, if we're being 100% honest. Shaq was the player which every single season basically did what he had to do, won a lot of games, and basically bullied himself into being the greatest player in the world. Shaquille O'Neal is the number one most dominant player of all time. I know that Wilt has the stats, but in my opinion, dominance goes far beyond the stats. And in my opinion, you put Shaq's body in any time in NBA history, and I do think that Shaq would do the same thing that he was doing in his era. And that's not no slight to Wilt. He'll eventually probably get his own video because of this GOAT series. I want to keep it going. But Shaq was just tough. Shaq, in my opinion, was one of those players who really revolutionized the big man position and was really one of the players that was needed, right? He was like Wilt, he was like Kareem, and he was like these dominant players which you can't really stop them, so you need the rules to be changed just to be able to play against them. You see with Wilt, they changed the free throw line dunk. They changed a bunch of rules for Wilt just so that he could dominate less, and because he was so powerful, so strong, and he had so many things going for him that it was like, how are we going to stop this dude, right? And in the end, thank God he didn't win all the championships because they probably would have kicked him out of the league. That's a joke. But if we're being honest, with Shaquille O'Neal, he came in to a league filled with centers. He played in the toughest era of all time for a center, in my opinion. It was like that mid '90s to early 2000s era. Well, mid '90s to mid 2000s era, because Shaq, I feel like it's from 1995 to 2005. You have the toughest big man era of all time, and Shaq was probably the best one out of all of them, maybe excluding Hakeem in the '90s, because Shaq was just phenomenal. And in this era, you had big men like Patrick Ewing, Kevin Garnett, Tim Duncan, David Robinson. You had Dirk. You had guys like Dikembe Mutombo, Ben Wallace. You had just other guys which were really tough on the floor, right? And other centers like Arvydas Sabonis, were just like combo centers. And in my opinion, this was really when the big men could shine. You had the Patrick Ewings. You had all of these guys just be phenomenal players, right? Like, even going deeper into it, if you don't even want to look at the greatest big men, you could just look at great ones like Brad Daugherty, Vlade Divac, Timmy, Rick Smits, and like Alonzo Mourning. And at this point, I'm just reading names, but you're really seeing a trend here, right? And it's that all of these guys and most of the big men in this era were great. Because if I just named you 10 big men which were all strong, were good, were like an all-star caliber players and played real minutes on NBA teams, then you know that I'm telling the truth. Like a guy like Rick Smits, he played in the 90s, and he played mostly in the 90s, and he played one season in the 2000s. And the dude was an all-star once. He was a really good center, and you could see it in his stats that he was just a really solid center. He was 7'4", he was 250, and he only ever got one all-star appearance. And that was because there were just too many people, too many centers, too many big bodies. And at the helm and at the top of all of that was Shaq, at least in the 2000s, because in the 90s it was Hakeem. You know, during this period, Shaq was phenomenal, right, during the 90s. And if we're really being honest, he had some great stints, but where he really broke out was in the 2000s, right, where you saw him play against guys like Yao Ming, like Chris Bosh, like all these all-time great centers and power forwards, and you saw Shaq dominate to the level that he was dominating, right? He was a player who was consistently going up against great big men like the Gasol brothers, right? He had his tough battles with everybody. I already said Ben Wallace, but we can mention him again. And he was going up against the best big men of all time, right? Defensive Player of the Year big men. Big men who went up in their primes, outside of their primes, and everything. And he was consistently making All-NBA teams and All-Star teams. And there's something to be said. And I know that a lot of people don't like to put emphasis on this, but the degree of difficulty that it took you to get an All-Star or an All-NBA appearance matters, right? Like, I'm sorry, but if you are a point guard in the modern day, getting an All-NBA appearance, you are phenomenal. You are one of the best guards, because right now we have so many phenomenal guards, so many all-time guards, that it's hard to get an All-NBA appearance. Like, we have Steph, Trey, Luka, we have all of these guys. We have De'Aaron. We have, like, seriously, there's so many guards in the NBA. We have Donovan Mitchell, SGA, whatever. Right, we have so many guards that it's hard to get an All-NBA position as a guard in the modern era. And in that era, in the 2000s and 90s, it was really hard to get an All-NBA appearance, an All-Star appearance if you were a center. You were competing with the best. And the fact that Shaq has 15 All-Star appearances, right, and that he has 14 All-NBA appearances really speaks to how dominant and how good he was. Apart from all of this, he's a one-time MVP, a four-time champion, and a three-time All-Defensive Team, which I don't think gets talked about enough. Three-time All-Defensive Team for Shaq means that with the big men that I just named, with the Ben Wallaces, Dikembe Mutombos, with Alonzo Mournings, with all these great defensive centers, Hakeem, David Robinson, Tim Duncan, with all these great defensive-minded centers and power forwards, right? And by the way, Tim Duncan played center at the start of his career. But at the midpoint of his career, and I just want you to say that so that he was competing with Tim Duncan too. He got 3 all-defensive appearances. And in my opinion, that's really impressive. Because when you look at a guy, right, like, let's say right now, getting an all-defensive appearance as a guard in the modern NBA is really easy. Because guards are not that good at defense now, as they were maybe in the 90s. But getting as a big man in that era was really difficult and was really taxing. And the fact that he got 3, I think, really speaks to Shaq's phenomenal rim protection and the way that he just cleared it up around the basket, even going as far as averaging 3 blocks 1 year. But in my opinion, Shaq's dominance comes from the stats. You could see it. He won 3 Finals MVPs, having probably the greatest Finals performance of all time in 2000, right? He was a 2-time scoring champ, 14-time All-NBA, a 1-time MVP. He was a Rookie of the Year where he averaged 23 points and 14 rebounds. And he was a 4-time champ, winning it in a tough era with different teams. And in my opinion, when we look at Shaq, when we look at him as one of the greatest players of all time, we just speak of pure dominance and excellence at knowing exactly what you're good at and mastering it to perfection, and that being the reason why you're so great. Shaq was phenomenal. and Shaq is one of the GOATs. He's up there, and I just wanted to talk about him. Next, I'll probably make a video on someone else. Keep this series going if you guys like it. Tell me what you think about Shaq. I'll see you in the next video.